Commissioner Paul,
Yes, I'm here.
Commissioner Greavy,
Present.
Commissioner Matthews,
Present.
Chairperson Childs,
Present.
Commissioner Cruzen, absent, and Commissioner Evans, absent. Oh, and I apologize, and Commissioner Warblin.
Present.
Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Matthews, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Information on providing public comments. Persons wishing to address the Planning Commission on subjects not on the agenda, but within the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission, provided that no action may be taken on off-agenda items except as authorized by law. Off-agenda items from the public will be taken under consideration without discussion by the Commission and may be referred to staff. Comments will be accepted in person or via Zoom. To speak on, here are the public comment instructions. To speak on an agenda item in person, please complete a speaker's card and give it to the secretary before the meeting or at the latest prior to the time for public comments on that item. When joining via Zoom, please use the raise your hand feature or press *9 on your phone to request to speak. You will be called on by name and will have 3 minutes to speak. Next is the approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda?
There are not.
Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Oh, I do second.
It has been moved and seconded to approve the agenda as submitted. We will vote by roll call. Mrs. Sheehan, will you conduct the roll call?
Yes. Commissioner Paul,
Yes.
Commissioner Greavy,
Yes.
Commissioner Warblin,
Yes.
Commissioner Matthews,
Approve.
Chairperson Childs,
Approved.
and Evans and Cruzen are absent.
Next is the approval of the minutes for the September 28th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting. Are there any changes to the minutes?
There are not.
Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Oh, I do second.
It has been moved and seconded to approve the minutes as submitted. Mrs. Sheehan, will you conduct the roll call?
Commissioner Paul,
Yes.
Commissioner Greavy,
Yes.
Commissioner Warblin,
Approve.
Commissioner Matthews,
Approve.
Chairperson Childs,
Approved.
and Evans and Cruzen are absent.
Now we're moving on to public comments. This is the time for the public to speak on items not on the agenda, but within the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission. I will now open the public comment period. And I see that I have 2 speaker cards, so I'm going to ask Nora Martinez if she'd come at this time.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity allowing me to address the Planning Commission.
Oh, yep.
Basically, what I'm opposing is into Fairfield moving in homeless shelters that cause a lot of problems for the adjoining community regarding density of population and the uncontrollable spread of homeless camps into residential neighborhoods which attract crime. The crime rate is atrocious. North Texas looks like a skid row from City Church on down. And I feel Shelter Solano Inc. does not properly economically use the shelter space. And as a matter of fact, the place is old and falling apart. With other words, they don't want to maintain it. They don't have proper building education of how you keep a massive shelter. It looks like a concentration camp, and it's basically just holding criminals. They will never be able to rent in a community because they use fear tactics, drugs, you name it. So I'm asking the planning commission, how do they propose to use open spaces or preserve open spaces to create a livable, this is unlivable, okay? A livable community in the city of Fairfield where, of course, you have military retirees, military widows, which I am. I came here by the military, and I really feel threatened by these criminal behavior people that, number one, don't pay a penny, number two, get SSI, and number three are just using as we're housing them. They should be housed, like I said, build build another county jail with minimum security and not use homeless shelters to facilitate criminal activity and/or costing $4 million just for office space and money that's unaccounted for. $5 million is missing. Well, I know where it went. And Kat Moy had a part of it too, you know. She knows people, homeless people that stole as much as $40,000. Opportunity House is another one of those scams. They have never housed people. Canby, why is the city planning on, what is the city planning on doing with the homeless people that are now in agricultural spaces, parked all in the side of the road in trashy vehicles, are unable to conduct themselves in any civilized community, so to speak, and yet building these massive shelters? I think the shelter should be shut down as it's really an environmental hazard, and the Shelton Oil Company in the back is driving their trucks through because they have a refinery back there, and suicidal people lay on the railroad tracks. I mean, duh. You complain about Nazi Germany,
Yes, Ms.
but you
Martinez?
got fascism and nationalism running these places. I'm against nationalizing these monstrous facilities by fascists who run the city.
Yes, Ms. Martinez.
Goodbye.
we
That's all
thank
I
you-
gotta
we
say.
Thank you for your comments. Okay. And my next speaker is George Kennedy.
Mike's ready.
Oh, I'm sorry. His is for a later agenda item. Do we have any speakers on Zoom? Okay. I will now close the public comment period. The next item on the agenda is scheduled matters. For each itemized item, there will be a presentation by city staff. For items that involve application requests, I will then ask the applicant to address the commission if they so desire. Then I will open the comment period via Zoom and in-house. I will close the comment period after all comments have been provided and after all our questions regarding the testimony during the comment period have been answered. After the comment period is closed, the commission will deliberate on the item and may have additional questions for staff. We cannot take additional testimony or questions from the public after the comment period is closed. So our first scheduled matter item is item A, appeal of minor development conditions of approval and use permit for Edison RV storage. And our presenter will be Miley Sheehan.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. Those of you joining us this evening, I'm Maylee Sheehan, and I will be presenting this item tonight. So tonight's item is an appeal for conditions of approval for a project that was approved by the zoning administrator. The city rarely receives appeal requests, and therefore I thought it would be beneficial to just give a brief overview of the process. So under section 25.41.4, authority for land use and zoning decisions of our zoning ordinance, the subject property or subject project, RV storage, falls under the review authority of the zoning administrator, and that is based on the project's scope. In this instance, it's the building square footage. This particular project does not have any building proposed. They are just carports that contribute to a square footage, and therefore it only rises to the level of minor development review. Under our zoning ordinance, minor development review is handled under the review authority of the zoning administrator. The zoning administrator is the community development director or their designee. In this instance, it was Dave Feinstein, the planning division manager. At this review level, public hearings are still required and held. The hearings are typically held mid-working day and facilitated by planning staff. Under Zoning Ordinance Section 25.44, Appeals and Calls for Review, a zoning administrator action can be appealed to the Planning Commission, as it has been this evening. Under that appeal, the Planning Commission may make modifications, deletions, or additions to the conditions of approval. Essentially, the entire project is open for your action this evening. The minor development being the construction of the project, the use permit providing conditions on the business operations, and of course, the appeal itself. So the appeal tonight is focused on certain conditions of approval, but again, the entire project scope of entitlements is subject to your purview this evening. So before diving straight into it, I do just want to give a quick overview of what this presentation will entail. I'm going to provide some background, seeing as this project did go through that zoning administrator process. Then I will provide a project description. We'll cover the key conditions of approval for the minor development and use permit. And then I will provide a summary of the appellant statements and staff analysis before making a recommendation. Applications for the project were received on April 7th, 2021. There was some delay on the project due to an extended environmental review process regarding stormwater design and the challenges with an adjacent creek. Jameson Canyon Creek runs at the rear of the property. Ultimately, civil changes were made and completely avoided impacts to the creek, and the project could be deemed exempt under the California Environmental Quality Act. However, you'll see that pause from April 7th to 2021 to June 13th, 2022. A lot of that was dealing with the environmental review aspect of the project. On June 13th, 2022, zoning administrator public hearing was held. At that hearing, the applicant team was present. No other members of the public attended. During the hearing, the applicant raised several concerns about a variety of conditions of approval. In order to provide more time for discussion, the hearing was continued and there was no formal action taken on that date. Later in June, staff and the applicant team met in a good faith effort to address all of the concerns. Several of those concerns were resolved just through communication and clarification, so I haven't highlighted them here, but if you have questions, we can go into it. What I have provided in an attempt to summarize is a table here highlighting the two topics of primary discussion. The first topic on the left-hand side is sign conditions. The conditions of approval presented included trash enclosure signage conditions. The requirement included identifying source separation for recyclables, organics, and garbage, that tenants and customers would have access to the enclosure, restrictions on disposal of hazardous and electronic waste in the enclosure, and contact information for Republic Services for additional waste management services. The applicant shared concerns that this condition would attract customers and others to dump large objects into the enclosure, creating excess waste on the project site, and placing an undue burden on the business. The applicant voiced their opinions that the business is not obligated to provide waste management for their customers, and offered considerations to keep the enclosure locked and restrict access in order to avoid these unwanted waste disposal. Therefore, to address the applicant's concerns, staff revised the condition by removing language regarding the source separation, disposal of hazardous and electronic waste, and the contact information for Republic Services. Additionally, some of the language was revised regarding tenant and customer access to the trash enclosure. Nuanced language was switched from trash enclosure to trash receptacles/carts. This was in an effort to provide the applicant flexibility on the operations of the trash enclosure. They did make clear they were concerned about excess dumping if that enclosure was fully accessible. So by changing that verbiage from enclosure to trash receptacles, the business would then have that flexibility to provide the receptacles in their preference and ensure that the trash did end up in the enclosure on their preference through their staff and then get serviced by Republic Services. The other item of topic at this meeting was the size of the trash enclosure. The conditions required a minimum of 18 feet by 9 feet. The applicant shared similar concerns regarding this condition. The condition did remain. Staff was unable to make revisions as we had described to the applicant that these dimensions were already less than what is required. The applicant did provide a description of their proposed RV storage, as well as records of another facility's weekly waste generation to illustrate that the condition size was oversized. Staff acknowledged this and stated that we were in agreement that the land use is of a lower intensity, and therefore the condition 18 by 9 foot dimension that was proposed has actually already been reduced per our city standards. And I'll provide a little more context to that as we move forward. I just wanted to give a real quick summary of that meeting, and then we'll dip into the actual project description here to give greater context to the project. Oh, and I apologize. On August 1st, that hearing was continued. These conditions were approved. Comments were made and reflected in your staff report, and that brings us to today. The project site is a 4.21 acre vacant lot off of Edison Court. The current zoning designation is IL, Limited Industrial. Here we have a contextual map giving you a greater idea. The star on the map is the project site. It's a little bit small. It's kind of towards the bottom right, if you will. The major freeways you can see here, Interstate 680, Interstate 80. You have crossroads of Fulton Drive and Edison Court to the project site, and it's also off of Lopes Road as well. At the top of the page, you can roughly see Business Center Drive. That is where the Safeway and Costco shopping centers are. And at the very bottom of the screen, you can sort of see a field to Rodriguez High School. The current general plan designation and zoning designation for the site is IL, Limited Industrial. The project consists of 132 covered parking stalls, approximately 66,000 square feet. There are additional 6 uncovered parking stalls. The carports will be constructed of galvanized steel with solar panels on the roof. The project will essentially function as an extension of the adjacent storage facility to the east, Storage Pro, and therefore access to the site will be off of Lopes Road, and you would meander through the Storage Pro project site until you arrived at the RV storage site, and then exit would be on to Edison Court. Compliant with our zoning ordinance section 2532-9E, the entire project is screened by a decorative 8-foot solid masonry wall. There are landscape improvements proposed along Edison Court frontage. Here we have the site plan. To the right side of the screen, you can see a portion of the Storage Pro self-storage project that just recently completed construction. You can see towards the bottom there, that would be your access point from the Storage Pro site onto the RV storage site, where there are the 132 covered carports. At the very top of the screen, I'm sorry, I don't have a laser pointer here. Here we go, apologies. At the very top of the screen, there is a proposed location for a trash enclosure. And as I mentioned, people would exit off of Edison Court, and this area of the site would be landscaped along Edison. The site will be screened by a masonry wall in compliance with our zoning ordinance, so these are the wall elevations. I also tried to enhance the visual of what the carports would look like. These are those landscape plans. As I mentioned, along that frontage, per our zoning regulations, there would be landscape materials, trees, shrubs, ground cover, etc. Some key conditions to the development review is an easement is required across the stream environmental zone. This would cover Jameson Canyon Creek. That easement should be dedicated to the city for maintenance of stormwater and open space. A reciprocal access parking and utility easement is also required. This is required across the Storage Pro project site and the RV storage project site to ensure that everyone has that cross access and parking that is necessary to facilitate the circulation of the project. And as mentioned, there are waste management signage conditions that need to be posted on site. Currently, those conditions require the sign to identify source separation for recyclables, organics, and garbage in compliance with our municipal code, and also that tenants and customers have access to the trash receptacles and carts for disposal of minor waste. Lastly, there is somewhat of a standard now for the city, a requirement that the construction be in protocol with the Yokadihi Wintun Nations tribal protocols. Should any particular cultural resources be found during construction, they would need to contact the tribe for proper procedures. As previously mentioned, the project does require a use permit. Vehicle storage in the IL zoning designation requires this permit. There are special conditions included in the permit to eliminate or minimize any potential negative impacts of the project. The first one listed here is that the site is to be diligently maintained with trash and debris collected and deposited into waste carts on a daily basis. The RV parking shall be for storage only. There shall be no vehicle sales or maintenance permitted. RVs that are stored on the site must be operable, and the RVs may not release hazardous waste. As mentioned earlier, the project did undergo a quite extensive environmental review process. Ultimately, the project was found to be exempt under Section 15332 infill development. It is consistent with our general plan and zoning regulations. It's on a less than 5 acre site surrounded by urban uses. There is no value for habitat or rare endangered species, and there are no significant impacts on traffic, noise, air quality, or water quality. For tonight, the primary purpose of this project coming to the Planning Commission, as I noted earlier, normally it would be handled through a zoning administrator, is that our offices have received an appeal. The applicant is appealing 4 of the project's conditions of approval. The first condition is regarding the trash enclosure waste signage requirements, stating that customers shall have access to the waste receptacles and carts. The second is a requirement to provide 2 cubic yard containers for waste and recycling. And the third and fourth is actually the same condition, just located in separate documents, one in the minor development conditions of approval and the other in the use permit. And this is a condition that is a standard city indemnification clause. Addressing the signage condition, the appellant has made 4 points to their appeal. The appellant asserts that the condition signage will invite customers to dispose of imported waste onto their site, including potentially hazardous waste. Therefore, this would burden the facility with waste management requirements that are above what is believed to be appropriate for the RV use, in their opinion. The appeal also cites that the signage condition conflicts with Municipal Code Section 9.230, litter, and requests more than a minimum requirement. And lastly, the appeal finds that the signage condition is not detailed enough, and that is subject to review and approval from the Public Works Department prior to the issuance of the building permit. I've structured the staff response to the appeal here to include intent, findings, background, and analysis. The intent of the condition was to safeguard the availability of waste disposal to the customers and ensure that waste is not left uncontained on the project site. The intent also allows staff to make the finding that the project will not be a nuisance or detrimental to the general welfare of the community. Uncontained waste could impact the facility operations, placing the responsibility to collect and dispose of waste on the business. And furthermore, uncontained waste could be dispersed by vehicles or wind and essentially placed into the adjacent properties, the right-of-way, or Jameson Creek. The signage language is necessary to ensure customers are aware that they have access to these receptacles and encourages proper waste disposal. The appellant's concerns about customers' disposal of hazardous materials on site are unrelated to the signage condition imposed. As noted in the background information, staff did coordinate with the applicant to revise conditions to alleviate concerns regarding access to the enclosure, hazardous electronic waste, and Republic Services contact. Some of that language could be reincorporated in order to alleviate the current appeal concerns. Additionally, Municipal Code 9.22 requires that the business owner shall, and I quote, prominently post and maintain one or more signs where recyclables and/or organic waste are collected and/or stored that set forth what materials are required to be source separated in addition to collection procedures for such materials. Notify and instruct employees and tenants of applicable source separation requirements, including a list of recyclable and organic waste that are required to be source separated for recycling. The reference to section 9.22 litter essentially states that any person shall dispose of waste properly and not litter. So the claim that the condition is in conflict with that section is not appropriate in the eyes of staff. We believe that perhaps they were referring to Municipal Code section 9.220. However, 9.220 does require a signage condition. And then lastly, the appellant's assertion that the signage condition improperly defers critical development details such as location, content, is unpersuasive, as staff did provide examples at our June meeting of what the signs could look like. The intent of the sign condition really is to guide the customers to a waste location. There was no statements or implications that the signage would be required off-site or visible to the public right-of-way or any persons not located on the project site. Again, additional prescriptive language could be added to this condition to provide more direction of what that signage would look like. Moving along, the second item under appeal is the trash enclosure dimensions, or the waste bin size dimensions, I should say. The appellant continues their appeal justification, noting that condition 12 of the Public Works Department requires 2 cubic yards of recycling and waste bins in the 18 by 9 foot enclosure. The appeal claims that the recycling and waste bins are larger than what is necessary for this facility. And the applicant restates that the condition will encourage customers to dispose of imported waste on-site and overburden the facility with excess waste management. The appellant is requesting that the Planning Commission consider reducing the size to a more reasonable requirement. The intent of this condition from the staff's perspective was to provide a minimum enclosure size that is necessary to facilitate the facility's management requirements, waste management requirements. Again, this meets the findings that the project will not be a nuisance or bear negative impacts on the community. During our June meeting, staff did explain that the condition had already been reduced in size. And regarding the receptacle sizes, the Public Works condition does not actually specifically state that the waste bins need to be 2 cubic yards. Rather, it just provides the minimum dimension enclosure of 18 by 9. And these dimensions are derived from the city's trash, recycling, and organics enclosure guidelines under the most applicable land use, office, retail, and general industrial. This is the table from said guidelines, and it might be a bit small, my apologies. This first box here, office, retail, industrial, and general commercial is the most applicable land use for the project. If we're going based off of coverage of square footage, the project is approximately 66,000 square feet. So per this table, an 18 by 12 foot trash enclosure would be required. However, we did hear the applicant when they had described their business operations and provided us fact sheets of another facility that they probably won't produce this much waste for that size enclosure. So we acknowledged that, and we have already reduced the requirement to the 18 by 9, which you can see is 2 tiers lower than what would typically be required. Lastly, we have the indemnification clause. The appeal concludes with an assertion that the city's indemnification clause is too broad when combined with the signage requirement. It is therefore unreasonably requiring the facility to assume risks imposed by the signage condition. The appellant requests that if the signage condition is to remain, that the indemnification conditions are revised to require the city to accept a joint liability for any claims arising out of the disposal of hazardous waste on site. From a staff perspective, the intent of the clause is to reduce city's liability on private property. This language was prepared with the guidance of legal counsel and has been standardized. The clause is a condition for every development project and every conditional use permit. In no circumstance do we recommend that that language be revised or removed. Just overall, my staff's analysis, we believe that these conditions are standard for commercial industrial projects. They are necessary to make findings that the requested minor development review and use permit will not have a nuisance or be detrimental to the health, safety, morals, peace, or general welfare of the community. The conditions are in question are necessary to implement and ensure that the operation of the RV storage facility won't be a detriment. And furthermore, we find that the conditions are proportional to the land use intensity and not an imposition on the applicant. So as a reminder this evening, there are 3 components to the action that you make tonight. You are being asked to take action on the minor development, the construction of the project, the use permit, which is the business operations under the IL zoning designation, and the appeal for the 4 conditions, the signage required at the trash enclosure, the size of the trash enclosure or the size of the toters, if you will, and then lastly, the 2 indemnification clauses. It's essentially the same condition but in 2 locations. And with that, staff recommends that you adopt Resolution 2022-12, denying the appeal and upholding the zoning administrator's approval of the minor development review and use permit with the conditions as proposed. And I'm happy to answer any questions that the commission may have. I'd also like to inform you that Corey Beavers, Management Analyst 2 of the Public Works Utility Division, is present. Corey is an integral component of the city's waste management practices and contributed to the conditions of approval for this project.
And thank you, Mei Lee. Do any of the commissioners have any questions for staff?
First of all, Ms. Sheehan, excellent presentation, very thorough, well presented. Thank you. Just one question on the solar, even though that's not part of the condition of improvement. Given that there are no improvements, is that just funding lighting or used for lighting underneath the
I would actually have to defer to the applicant to see how they are interested in utilizing their solar. I do know that this project, as mentioned, is essentially an extension to the mini storage facility to the east.
So it may be feeding over there?
Perhaps, but I would defer to the applicant.
We'll ask the applicant. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Any other commissioner questions for staff? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to ask the appellant if they'd like to make a brief statement regarding their appeal.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I don't hear the,
Is the green light on?
no,
It should be just a hot mic, like it's always on.
it's always on. Great.
Might just need
Good to know.
closer.
I can't hear it. Oh, now, okay. I'm trying to be very respectful of the 6 inches, so that might be the issue. In any case, good evening, commissioners, staff. My name is Dana Dean, and I'm here representing the applicant appellant, Steve Mirabito, and also known as Storage Pro Fairfield. Happy to be here tonight. I do want to start with a couple of things. First, I do want to thank everyone for their effort to pull this together. Certainly my client, staff, they have worked hard over the period of time to make this a successful project. However, we've reached a point where I think there's kind of a fundamental misunderstanding about the significance of the conditions that are being required, actually forced on the applicant, and that's what we want to talk about tonight. More precisely, regarding the signage. And actually, I'm going to ask, could you possibly put up the slide that you had that showed the use permit? You had like 4 or 5 bullet points about the use permit itself. Thanks. Yes, thank you. The signage requirement is completely inappropriate for the site and what the site's going to be used for, which is to store recreational vehicles. I think there's sort of an on-the-ground, there's not a recognition of what happens on the ground with this particular use. And we'll start with the use permit itself doesn't allow for what staff is asking you to require. So let me say it this way. The site, you'll notice the first condition is the site is to be diligently maintained. So staff is, trash, et cetera, staff is saying we need to have the signage, we need to have this massive accommodation for trash for customers, et cetera, and yet in order to avoid uncontained trash, but already they're not allowed to have uncontained trash. So it's not going to happen. There isn't going to be uncontained trash. You've already conditioned the whole approval on that not happening. So that's a consideration. Also, in requiring the business owner to announce a place for people to put their trash, you're essentially advertising, put your trash here. You're asking them, or you're inviting them to do something that's not required or appropriate for the site. This is what happens. People are going to drive their RV in, they're going to park the RV, and then they're going to leave. It's not unlike the storage facility that already exists, the companion storage facility, where people come in, they put their stuff in their storage container, their storage area, and they leave. In that setting, there's no accommodation for the customers to leave their trash. That's not what happens. There are trash facilities there, but that's just for the administration and the offices of the storage facility. It's not for people coming and going. They take their trash with them. Similarly, you have RVs coming in from vacation or wherever they're coming from. They're parking. They are not going to be in a position where they should be allowed to leave whatever is coming out of there. Traditionally, they would be taking whatever they have with them, or actually they probably would have stopped at their house and unpacked or whatever before they come to store their RV. So it's incredibly important to understand how the thing actually functions. And because of requiring this business owner to put these signs up and say, hey, leave your trash here, put your trash here, not only are you increasing the burden on the business by making them dispose of what would otherwise not be there, but also you are putting them in a position where it's more likely that hazardous materials and other things will be left on the site, and then they are burdened with disposing of it. And it's just not the way the business runs. So I think that's an important consideration. I did want to mention, in terms of the amount of what's being required, we do have a couple of things that I'd be happy to pass out, which I think staff mentioned. One is one is the billing for the storage facility. See, they use very little. Thank you. And then the second is for the 20-acre site that was referenced. Is a 20-acre RV facility, storage facility in Southern California. So 5 times, more than 5 times, or about 5 times the size of this facility. They don't use nearly what is being required of this gentleman. So in sum, it's just too much. You're asking too much. This is someone who's come to our city. I'm sure you've all been by Storage Pro. It's a lovely, new, bright, shiny example of exactly what should be going on here. And this is incredibly discouraging for someone like him to come and really try to bring a lovely facility, a needed facility, actually, to the community. So we're asking tonight that you uphold our appeal and that you strike the first 2 considerations. And actually, if Ms. Sheehan, if we could now move to the indemnity clause. I do want to mention, so we'd ask you to strike those 2 requirements, first the signage and then the size of the waste storage. The other thing is about the indemnity. The indemnity issue really trails the other 2, right? So if you're putting this owner in a position where he has to be responsible for hazardous materials, which he otherwise would not be, then it is appropriate to share the responsibility for that. That's not a part of this business, and you are making it a part of this business. So that is why we have asked for the indemnity issue to be addressed. If the other 2 issues are resolved, then the normal indemnity considerations would not be a concern. So I feel like you guys have questions, and ladies and gentlemen have questions. I'm wondering if my client would like to speak on a couple of the issues that were raised. I know a couple of things came up that I think are worth him speaking about. And then I'm around for questions if you have them. Okay.
Do any of the commissioners have questions? I'm sorry. I'm sorry, okay.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, Miley, do you mind putting the terms of the indemnification up for everyone to see, please?
Unfortunately, I don't have the exact verbiage, but in the agenda here, let's see. I have it as attachment or Exhibit A in the zoning administrator conditions of approval. It is condition number, sorry, almost there. 3.7. I don't have the exact language built into the PowerPoint. My apologies. It's page 3 of the conditions of approval.
While she's working on that, I want to first introduce myself. My name is Steve Marabito. I'm the owner of Storage Pro Fairfield. I want to first thank everyone, for this moment to discuss things. And, Miley's done an excellent job working on the planning staff. Mr. Beavers has done wonderful, passionate job. We've been very passionate, discussed things passionately about this project, but we came to a complete difference of opinion. And that's based on 40 years of managing self-storage facilities. I manage currently well north of 50,000 customers. And I wanted to share with the staff my beliefs and my understanding of how our business operates. I'm not trying to, I believe if you've driven by my facility on Lopes Road. It's a first-class facility. That's how I operate my facilities. That's how I operate all 105 properties that we manage. My company manages for other owners as well. We manage, 3 other properties here in Fairfield as well for other clients. And if you notice, all of them, they're all well-maintained, clean, safe, and secure environments. That's how we run the business. That's why I am, in the self-storage business and running the self-storage business. I think, as Miley points out, it's very rare, as a former planning commissioner, it's very rare. I've never even have seen people have to appeal a zoning administrator's ruling. That's everybody's dream as a developer, is to have, work with staff and get things resolved. Unfortunately, we've come to a difference of opinion. And I think if you read the indemnification clause that I am required to sign versus what I'm being told to do, okay, it's like oil and water. I am being held accountable and responsible, liable for things that the city is dictating, okay? Insuring against hazardous waste. Well, what better way to bring on hazardous waste than to bring on a big freaking, 20-foot long, garbage dump station for, open to the public, okay? Let me back up a little bit and explain how we operate things, okay? We have one manager on premise, okay? We have a 95-gallon dumpster or cart, just like you have at your homes. And just like yourselves, okay, what we do with that dumpster, we put it in the garage. There's a garage area that all the the dumpster, the one dumpster that we need and use, goes in there. And despite 4 acres of storage there, we don't fill it on a weekly basis. So I am not sure how we got to 3-yard dumpsters or 2-yard dumpster, whatever. We, in staff originally a couple of years ago, when I got the self-storage approved, understood the uniqueness of our business and granted us the opportunity to put the dumpster or the rolling cart in the garage in lieu of a whatever you call the containers. I'm sorry?
Enclosure?
Enclosures, outside enclosure, where whenever anybody sees an outside enclosure, they know that's junk, and let's just dump our junk there. We leave it on the inside. The property is perfectly clean. The landscaping is perfectly clean. We've never, in all the operations of all our facilities, we don't use dumpsters because it's not what our business is. It's only for storage. And this is the same thing goes with this RV space. It's strictly for storage. And as a condition of approval, no one is allowed to do anything on the property except for storing their property. So we're stuck under a use permit required that nobody can do anything. They can't even be cleaning their RVs, okay? If they were allowed to clean their RVs, maybe that might change things, but they're not even allowed because of such strict use permit conditions. I'll accept that. I have no problem with that. Here are the 2 other options the city has. If I'm a bad operator and I'm leaving trash around, revoke my use permit. You'll never do it because I don't do it that way. And I understand the business clear enough, and I understand the operations clear enough that we don't need that garbage. Second thing, I was required to sign a SWIP conditions of agreement with the city that I am obligated to maintain. This is recorded on my title. I'm obligated to maintain a clean environment. Landscaping must not have any litter. I'm not even allowed to have a weed on my property. Okay? So I think the city has a lot of leverage over myself, and I accept that. But putting signage requirements on, which, by the way, I had never received a copy of proposed signage, requirements, And as a result of that, this is why one of the conditions on the signage requirement is that the staff has the ability to review and make any decisions on signage indefinitely, basically. So I'll be ready to open, and I may be subject to new signage requirements. There's no definitiveness in terms of what the signs require, okay? So in summary, all I'm asking for
It's in your packet, the indemnity language.
just moving on. In conclusion, all I'm asking for, please remove that signage requirement. Allow me to use my dumpsters or my carts. You know, and if, I have no problem even into the future, as a willingness, okay, to demonstrate my good faith effort, if, you know, to identify a location where we would put the dumpsters if we ever, or the enclosures if we ever needed it. But I'm being compromised on the safety and the security of my property, and then I'm being required to also sign the same indemnification. That's basically, I've got a hammer over my head. And I don't think that's fair. That's not how, it's like allow myself to operate my property the way I see fit and best, okay? I know how much garbage requirement that is necessary. And as you look at the property, or you look at any of the other properties I manage, they're clean, they're safe, they're secure. Thank you. Appreciate it. Any questions?
Commissioners, any questions for the appellant?
I do have just a couple. So, have you quantified what you think the cost of this requirement would be? Let's set aside the indemnification for the moment. You know, this whole issue of the trash enclosure. And what I hear you saying is, by the presence of the trash enclosure and related signage, you feel like it will encourage your renters of space to use that. Have you quantified what that amount of exposure is that you're concerned about?
I think the upfront cost for the enclosure, let's say $20,000.
I'm really
Yeah.
talking about operating costs. I mean,
Okay.
you gave some examples here of costs.
Yeah, there's no operating cost of having the trash enclosure. What it is it's an open invitation to dump.
Yeah,
Okay?
yes, but that's the point, that would make you incur costs to remove that.
Precisely. And
So
right now, we're
have you
paying,
quantified that?
We have an estimate.
well, we're into, a minimum of 3 yards. That dump station is big enough for 3 yards. And this is the problem, is when people see dump stations, and I was visiting a property last week, and I'm like, oh my God, the dump, the trash enclosure in the station was visible, and there were beds there was stuff just leaning up against it, because it was like, hey, it's a free dumpster. That's why gas stations, you notice, don't have their dumpsters behind their the gas stations any longer, because they realize it's an open invitation for people to dump stuff at late hours of the evening. That's why Costco has a large parking lot, and they don't ask you to return all the cardboard boxes that people leave on the ground, right? And they don't leave a dumpster out there for you to return it to. There's a reason why. It's just an open invitation.
So
It-
to more precisely answer that, so I don't believe we have gotten dollar figures on that, but it's easy to understand, all of us understand, that when that circumstance occurs, we're going to have to pay someone to come out and get it. We're going to have to pay the dump fees for it. There's mattress fees. So just generally, and that's just for what we would consider to be normal waste. I'm sorry, that's, I'm getting stage cues. That's just what we would consider to be normal waste, right? If we get into hazardous waste concerns, then it's the sky's the limit on those costs.
Okay, do you mind if I just ask a few follow-up questions here? First of all, will your users have 24/7 access to come and go?
No.
So when they do have access, you will have personnel on site, is that correct? That's what I heard?
Not all the time, no. I can't say that, no. No, there are plenty of times there, they will have access, but no one will be on site.
Okay, so getting back to my point of the quantification of the cost of just trash removal, we deal with this in a number of other facilities during my normal day job, and we're talking a couple $100 a month. It's not significant. That's the point that I'm trying to bring out here, that, the actual removal of trash is not a significant financial burden. And if you have personnel on site generally monitoring that, you can have recourse to those people who may violate it. Now, before you respond to that, I'd like to just ask staff, have we made any exceptions in any other developments within the city where we have not required a trash enclosure?
To the best of my knowledge, no, but I will defer to Corey as that is a condition typically derived from our Public Works Department.
Correct. To the best of my knowledge, no, we have not conditioned any development to not have trash enclosures. There may be a few that exist that were before that development was required, but it would have been an archaic building, something.
And
Thank you.
if you don't mind, if I can just continue on another thought with our city attorney.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Matthews. We on Zoom, we cannot hear the gentleman speaking. If he
The
can
answer
repeat that
was
with the
no.
microphone, please.
The answer is no.
Thank you. Thank you.
With respect to the indemnification issue, if they have, and maybe this is first a question for our applicant, I assume everybody that rents from you has to sign an agreement. And I would assume within that agreement, you have responsibilities and limitations relative to trash, especially with respect to hazardous waste. Is that correct?
Of course.
Okay.
Yes.
And so,
Yes.
with respect to the city's position on that, if in fact there were an issue, is it your opinion that the applicant, the operator, would then have the right to have recourse further down to their actual user?
Well, I'm not counsel to,
Right.
private developers, and so, but generally, yes, they could enforce their contract terms against the people who violate those terms. And further, we don't, along with what Corey was saying, we don't typically waive this indemnification requirement, just as if any other development, someone could come and dispose of hazardous waste there, and that's not a reason for the city to waive its indemnification language.
Though the concern is not with third parties, you referenced Costco and other locations. This is a completely enclosed fenced area where only your users would have access. Would you agree with that?
Generally.
I mean, someone would have to climb over a 6 or
Or they
8
could
foot fence.
walk in when the fence is, or yeah, they could climb over a fence, but generally speaking,
Yeah.
but
Uh,
it's not,
that's-
not to entirely exclude trespassers, because I think that is a factor, right? But what you're talking about, but the core of it is the people driving their RVs in. People driving RVs in to store. That is the core issue. And whether they are customers or clients, the core issue is them taking advantage of a circumstance that my client finds himself in, particularly with regard to signage. And the big bright sign says, dump your trash here. But So that's the core of it. And while I understand that other places might not, might also have circumstances where hazardous materials would appear, that's true. But in this case, you're setting it up. It's a setup for hazardous materials.
Again, a question for staff. In the packet, there was an example of signage. Was that shared with the applicant?
In your packet, the example of signage was actually an example that the applicant had brought to the June meeting. However, I do have an example at the end of this presentation. Still, the seat thing is difficult. And I can defer here to Corey a little bit if you would like some elaboration on this signage.
So was this shared with the applicant?
To my recollection, yes.
And is the applicant disputing that?
To my recollection, no, but
So yes, we're disputing it. I don't recognize it. Let me put it that way.
Okay, this looks to me like this is signage from Republic. Is that correct? I mean, I see this in other locations.
This signage is not from Republic Services. This is signage from the California Department of Recycling, also known as CalRecycle. This is pretty standardized signage that shows just diversion of what can go in these separate waste streams.
That's not the condition.
Okay, sorry to be so dominant. I'm done with my questions.
Yeah, and if I could speak to just two more things. One, that's not, I don't believe that's consistent with the condition that's actually at issue. So this is news to us, kind of, is what I would say. And then secondly, with regard to the contractual obligations of the tenants or the users, certainly, one could pursue the tenant or the user if you were able to identify them as the source, and maybe you could, maybe you couldn't, of whatever the hazardous contamination is, one. But that doesn't mean that you would succeed in full recovery from that. It doesn't mean that the city would not be sued as well, not by us, but by Regional Water Quality Control Board or some other regulatory agency. And you're requiring this gentleman to allow for that kind of thing to happen. And yet, if the city who required it gets sued, he has to pay for that. That's the burden. That's a huge burden. It disappears if you don't require him to do massive sign or any kind of signing that to say, drop your trash here. People, drop your trash here. And if you don't require him to set up a circumstance that invites that kind of problem. So the indemnity issue is really directly related to the other two conditions. Our concern with the indemnity clause is directly related to those two other conditions. And if they disappear, then if they are deleted, and if our appeal is upheld, then the indemnity concern is less of a concern.
May I add, please, the sign that you see in your packet, yeah, that was a sign required for the self-storage portion of it. In lieu of a dumpster, okay, staff recognized, and we pleaded our case, and it was acknowledged that, yeah, self-storage does not need a 3-yard dumpster for recycling and a 3-yard dumpster for garbage. They said, as long as you're going to only be using a 95-gallon cart, then you can store it in the garage, just like any other house would, because you only have one, person there, and all they're doing is sweeping a little bit. But they required that this sign be posted, and we did. We complied with them at the front of the property. We have no problems. That's why, we only use a 95-yard, dumpster. And I'm going to add this other thing. Going back to the original conditions of approval back in July of 2021, this was the requirement for trash enclosures, okay? It was 2 paragraphs. There was no reference to signage. So what happened between then and now that we have to have all the signs? The city has to, sign off on any signs and has subject to approval of the city, any future signs or any other requirements. Let's just go back to the 2021 requirements. Something happened, okay, that all of a sudden now it got, 2 or 3 pages of garbage requirements. Okay? Ms. Noel did a wonderful, or Public Works did a wonderful job. I have no problems with this requirement. But now, all of a sudden, I've got all this signage requirement. So you drive into my property, you are responsible for getting rid of your own waste, okay? Then you go into the RV area and you're like, hey, come on, free garbage dumping. Why am I having to take that on? And then, by the way, and the applicant has, or the owner must, indemnify the city for forcing me to put signage up. I don't think that's fair. And it's not appropriate. I would not, let's then start, telling Safeway they can only sell choice beef and not USDA prime beef. It's like, where does this stop? That all through the indemnifications, all through all the use permit, okay, everything, I have to maintain a clean, safe, and secure property. But government knows more than I do about my signage requirements and needs. And government knows more than I do for, dumpster needs. I beg to differ. And I run a first-class facility. I plan to run a first-class facility, but I know what I need, and I don't need the invitation to, free-for-all, dump your stuff here. Because then it becomes a dirty, ongoing problem, okay? Then the garbage dumpster is the cheap stuff. It's the maintaining of it. Because I guarantee you, the stuff will get dumped outside. They're not going to go through a enclosure and this and that just to get, dump their stuff. They'll just throw the bags right by the side. Just like in the old days, with the garbage, at gas stations. People would, drive around the corner, dump all their stuff, right by their dumpster. They didn't even have the courtesy of putting it in the dumpster, right? So.
Commissioners, any other
Yes.
questions or comments?
Yes, please. Maybe I misread our information. Did you make a specific request that it be a 2-yard dumpster?
No. Condition 12 of the Public Works Department Conditions of Approval requires the 18 by 9 enclosure.
Storage enclosure.
Enclosure, correct.
Okay, thank you. To the two of you, and I've been self-employed my entire life, so I can appreciate the frustration you're dealing with. However, I think on a couple of things, maybe you're crying wolf, particularly on the invitation for dumping trash. Do you have key access or keypad to get into the unit, into the facility?
That's correct, yes.
You bet. And do you have video surveillance in that facility?
Doubtful, may not.
Really?
I don't need, this is the key
Okay.
thing. I don't need the garbage area. So, yeah, I'm going to build this, White Castle on behalf of the city, but I don't need it, and I'm not going to use it. I'm going to be storing all the garbage in the garage, where our garbage dumpster is.
I understand. I don't believe you need a 2-yard dumpster. I think that if you had a couple of those trash cans, I think it's a courtesy, if nothing else, for your customers to be able to keep your place clean, that they don't just leave that soda can sitting outside by the side of somebody else's trailer, because that's what they would do. I don't think the signage is an invite, because the signage is interior. It's not exterior. You're not putting it out on the street. You're not saying, hey, come here, we have in flashing lights, I don't think. I believe that's information for your patrons, and that can be inside of the enclosure. Am I wrong?
Sir, with all due respect, I agree with everything you say, except that, remember, that soda can, I don't think somebody on a 3-acre lot is going to walk 3 acres over, okay, to go to the dumpster there. That's the routine maintenance that we'll have to maintain,
True.
okay? I don't think somebody way over, you know.
I'm speaking of internal customers, because you've got them locked in.
That's what I'm talking about, is an internal customer is not going to walk, 300 yards, okay, 1,500 feet to go to the, garbage dumpster in 90-degree weather. That's not going to happen, okay? I just don't want the signage, okay? You don't require Costco to take the signage, put signage up. It's just, and then at the same time, I have to sign an indemnification with the city, even though, you got an L on both wrists right now of one, I've got an indemnification requirement. 2, I've got the SWIP requirements that have to require a clean premise. Okay, it's not like the old days. Now it's recorded right there on the premise. And then the third one is the use permit. Okay, I can handle my business. I understand how to run that business, and I will do it. Okay, and if I'm not, if it's filthy, revoke the use permit, please, immediately. And as a former planning commissioner, we used to do that. Okay, it's hard. Okay, but people do maintain their property. And I think there's 30 pages, it's about 30 pages of conditions of approval. And a couple of pages on signage and garbage and how this and that. All I ask, let's go back to the July 2021 conditions of approval. Okay, there's no signage requirement there, just please, that's all I'm asking. Get the signage off, I'll be happy. But I don't want the signage that the staff is requiring. And read the condition of approval on signage. Miley, do you mind reading that, please?
Yeah, let me pull it. This is special condition 1.1C. The following waste management signage shall be posted on site. Final design, verbiage, and placement location shall be subject to the review and approval of the Public Works Department. Subset I, signage identifying source-separated recyclables, organics, and garbage receptacles, in parentheses, Fairfield Municipal Code, Section 9.220. Subsection 2, signage stating tenants/customers shall have access to trash receptacles/carts for the disposal of minor waste debris. That is the conclusion of the condition.
So there's, the way I understand it is the final, well, first of all, a sign stating the access, customers have access to the dumpster,
To the trash receptacles/carts.
trash enclosures slash carts. And then so that's not the sign that is up there.
That would be for the source-separated recyclables, organics, and garbage receptacles.
And I think Republic Services or Waste Management has those stickers just like that on all their on their containers. Is that correct?
I wouldn't be familiar, I'm sorry. Corey may have that information.
For all intents and purposes, yes.
Okay, so we have no problems with that, okay? What I have a problem with is this signage, that is subject to staff. There's no definition of where locations. It's all subject to be determined by staff in the future, okay, of the verbiage and the location of the signage that states, quote unquote, customers have access to the dumpster. Okay, that is the bottom line. That's what drives, is totally unacceptable. And all I'm asking, remove that. And as I've told staff, I'm even willing, I have no problem with building this monument for, trash enclosure, even though we're not going to use it. What I'd rather do, and I would ask you just two items. I completely agree with everything in the conditions of approval. I have nothing about it except for, number one, the removal of that signage stating, customers have access to using our dumpsters that are going to be on the other property, so they won't be able to go back to the other property. They're going to have to drive all the way around and then go back to the property and then find the manager and have access to it. So all I'm asking, remove that. And the second thing is require that we identify a spot for the trash enclosure, okay, but it not be developed unless we need it. 2 requests. Other than that, I am 100% in agreement with staff. But I ask that I don't be dictated, and have signs up allowing customers to dump unless we're going to, that's big thing. And then secondly, because we're not going to use this dumpster, I have no problem dedicating a spot for it for future use. I have no problem with that. So I think that's a very fair compromise, and I'm willing to accept those.
Commissioners, excuse me, Steve. I do want to point out that second request to create a designated spot but not construct the enclosure is not part of the appeal application, so it was not part of this analysis. But I would remind the commissioners that since we are here at an appeal hearing, you do have the purview to review all of these conditions. You may add, edit, remove, modify any condition within this packet, so you choose.
Let me ask this question. Are we at liberty to have further discussion about this?
Yes.
Have we?
Sorry, I believe Paul had comments.
Yeah, okay. Okay, sir, you did compare our household containers to your business containers. In the household, we have small containers. I do agree with that. But your facility is a business. It has like 4 acres of land you'll be covering for the RV storage. And at least 138 people are going to be using that place. And I'm pretty sure they do need some place to put their trash, because usually when you store at any place, they'll take very little trash out of their storage, out of their RVs, and they're going to put in the dumpster in your storage place. And I don't think we can compare to household to the business. There are different rules for the business, as I understand, as compared to the household containers. And secondly, will you have any restrooms at your place for your customers or no?
Do we have any, I'm sorry?
Will you have any restrooms?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Will you put any signs on the restrooms or no?
Well,
This is the restroom or no?
The state required unisex sign, yes.
Yes. Then definitely you guys put restroom, then one is for male, the other one is females, right?
I'm sorry?
There are 2 signs. One is for the males.
No, it's one restroom and it's a unisex.
Okay, so you're going to be having just one restroom.
That's correct.
Okay, then that's fine. But still, you have going to have a restroom there, a restroom sign, right? People might know, well, it's the restroom.
Yeah.
Putting a sign doesn't mean that they will definitely go in that restroom. It's the same thing. If you put a sign, well, you can put your trash in a particular place. They're going to dump it. No, not necessarily. Only they'll do it if they have some trash in their RVs.
So then I beg the question,
Yeah,
why
sure.
is a company like Costco allowed unfettered, no signage anywhere about garbage dumping? Because their parking lot is not a clean parking lot on busy days. So why is a small little independent operator, okay, who understands and controls it, and we're dealing with an internal, it's not just unfettered access of getting into my facility. Why am I having to put signage up, but then open properties throughout the city are exempt from the same requirement?
Commissioners, I'd like to answer that. Hello? Hello? I'm just going to talk.
Okay, sure.
Hopefully, Tina, Warblin, you can hear me.
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you. This condition is a special condition since this project does require the review and approval from the city of Fairfield, specifically the zoning administrator in the initial round. The project is not a permitted by right use. It does require a use permit. And so this condition is a special condition for this particular project, whereas you wouldn't see this maybe as being exampled at Costco. This condition was drafted after analysis between city staff, and we felt that it was appropriate and necessary in order to make the findings of approval for this project, that there wouldn't be any impacts to the greater community for waste. There were concerns that perhaps if this trash enclosure was not accessible, waste would be left uncontained and could have the possibility of bleeding over into the right-of-way, adjacent properties, or Jameson Canyon Creek. And that is the reason why this condition was applied.
And I have, as you do agree, I have the responsibility mandated and required by the city. I had to record an easement or a record on the property my obligation, I believe it's under criminal statute, of maintaining the landscaping along Jameson Creek, okay? I can't have litter there. I can't even have a weed, okay? Tell that to everybody throughout, the city, that I can't have a weed, okay? I'm obligated to pull weeds out of along there, okay? That's the draconian requirements I'm under. I'm not complaining about that, okay? I am complaining about the signage. And why did it all of a sudden happen? What happened to the July 2021 conditions of approval? What changed between July and, a couple months later or a year later?
Those conditions were never finalized, so these were the final conditions once it was in new staff hands and under a new analysis. A lot of those conditions were pre-drafted while we were still undergoing the environmental review process, so they were not finalized conditions.
And the city has garbage requirements as part of the code, is that correct?
Correct.
City code, okay. But there's no signage requirement saying, hey, free use of my dumpster.
Correct. This is a special condition, and it is directed towards your tenants and customers.
So there's no use permit at Costco for the gas station or the,
To the best of my knowledge, there is not, no. And I would recommend to the commissioners, if you would like to hear more information from the applicant to continue the discussion. I do believe Commissioner Warblin hasn't had a chance to make comment, but I do want to remind everyone that we need to open and close the public hearing before we make final comments and a motion.
Okay. I'd like to hear from Commissioner Warblin at this time.
Thank you, Chairperson and Ms. Sheehan. I think my comments were similar to Commissioner Paul, that with the property with this amount of acreage, I don't think a home use garbage container would be sufficient in that 2 yards or 3 yards container seems reasonable. And I understand from the business owner, the applicant, or the appellate, I completely understand their concern that they don't want their lovely property to turn into a dumpster and a free-for-all for all 138 vehicles. But it does seem reasonable to have some type of receptacle for trash and recyclables.
Okay.
I don't, at this point, have any further comments.
Okay. I'm going to now open up for public comment, and I see that I do have one speaker card from George Kennedy.
Good evening, Chairman, Commissioners. George Kennedy, resident of Cordelia. I drive by Storage Pro all the time, and I was reading the agenda tonight, and I had not planned on coming down here, but then I'm looking at it, and my mind was just blown. I want to go over a few things, but first of all, I want to bring a common sense approach to all this. 9 by 18 feet. If you look out here, count all the way over to those chairs, go up 4, that's about 160 square feet. 9 by 18 is 162 square feet. You know the big construction dumpsters that you see out, where Cino's building their homes or Pulte or whoever? That's about the size of the dumpster that you would expect in a 9 by 18 facility. There is no way on God's green earth that a facility that has 138 places, those RVs are not going to go in and out 138 times a day. You're talking, some of those places, people won't use that once a month, maybe twice a month. Use a common sense approach. How many trips do you honestly think will happen, and how much garbage will they use up? Comment C, the schools. I live across from Cordelia Hills Elementary School. I see the garbage truck come by. That school has 500 kids. They use a 4-yard container, not even every day. You're talking a facility that might have 100 people a week go through there. D, I have businesses at San Francisco International Airport. 22,000 people a day go through the United Terminal at SFO Terminal 3. They don't have a dumpster that big. Now, my one business does 600 customers a day, and I don't fill up a 4-yard dumpster on a daily basis. E, gas station was talked about. Costco. When we all go to Costco or Chevron or whatever, they have garbage cans there, right? We use the garbage cans to put our garbage in when we're getting gas. Why? Because it's there. If it wasn't there, would you be leaving your trash there? Most likely not. I'm asking you to uphold the appeal. The signage, I've never seen that on any business in this city. We all have garbage cans at our house. My 3-year-old grandson knows that if it's got a green top, that's for recycling of yard waste and composting, right? He knows the blue is for recycling, and he knows the gray is for trash. This is a 3-year-old. And we don't have these on ours. We've got how many 10s and 20, we've got about 12,000 homes in District 1. We don't have those on our garbage cans. But yet you expect these guys to have to do that? Take a common sense approach and think, if this was your money, would you want to spend $20,000+ for an enclosure that is at best 6 times bigger than the garbage can you would need? All I ask is use some common sense. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Do we have any more public comments on Zoom?
No, we do not.
So I'm going to now close the public comment section. Okay. Okay, do we have any further discussion by the commission?
Perhaps another question. I don't disagree with Mr. Kennedy. I didn't believe we need a 2-yard dumpster. I do not believe we need that. I really don't at that facility. But I do believe that we need trash receptacles that the public can get to. So I think I would like to see something formulated that would amend that to a more, as Mr. Kennedy said, realistic size for the scope of what we're doing here. The one comment that was made, I believe, was that the strict enforcement was put in to protect the creek. Am I correct?
It's to protect the general welfare of the community. This project site is adjacent to a creek, but it would also be for public right-of-ways and any adjacent properties as well.
Sure. Okay. But we're dealing with a facility that's going to have an 8-foot cinder block wall surrounding the whole thing? Am I correct?
Correct.
Okay. I don't see how much garbage and trash is actually going to escape. I know we got a bit of a breeze over there, but I don't think it's going to be that much. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Ms. Sheehan, would you bring up the schedule where you show the different size trash areas? Yes. So the smallest is 13 by 8, and what you're proposing is 18 by 9. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. You know, a smaller size, my personal opinion is, the cost is going to be rather insignificant. Maybe it'll be a couple $1,000 difference in actual construction costs. I'm not persuaded by the arguments that I've heard that this is an overburden. I do respect that we've got an applicant that's a professional operator of these kinds of facilities. And as has been mentioned previously, I understand the frustration, but there are so many other conditions of approval that, frankly, I think would be more burdensome than this. I just have a hard time understanding why this is the issue that becomes, the deal point. One point that I do want to just have clarification, should we not approve the appeal, the applicant still has the right to go to City Council, is that correct?
Correct. It is in the applicant's right to appeal the Planning Commission's action, regardless of what that action is, to the City Council.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Any further discussion? Do I have a motion to approve Resolution PC 2022.12 pertaining to item A?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Mrs. Sheehan, will you conduct the roll call vote?
Yes. Commissioner Paul?
Yes, I'll go for a small enclosure, like Mr. Chris said, 13 by 8. I propose that one.
So would you like to make an alternative motion to the
Yes.
resolution to reduce the enclosure size?
Yes,
And that would be to 13 by 8?
correct.
Can I have a second on that?
So do we need a new motion, right?
So I believe Commissioner Paul has just started the alternate motion. Now we're at the point where we would request a second on the alternate motion before we would handle the original motion. We vote on the latest brought motion first, and then work our way backwards.
That's smaller. I don't think it makes a difference either way. But why don't you, if you do
I'll second Paul's motion.
A roll call.
Roll call.
Okay. Mrs. Sheehan, a roll call vote?
Commissioner Paul? Yes. Commissioner Greavy?
Approved.
Commissioner Warblin?
I want to clarify, just from Mr. City Attorney, we are voting on the modification and not the original motion?
That's correct, and it'd probably be helpful at this point to clarify exactly what this motion is. So from what I've heard, I believe we are modifying condition number 12 of the conditions of development and none of the other conditions of approval. Is that correct, Commissioner Paul?
Yes,
And that modification is to reduce the square footage of the trash enclosure from 18 by 9 feet and reducing that to 13 by 8 feet. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Melee, I think roll call vote on that motion.
Yes, and I'll begin from the beginning just for clarification. Commissioner Paul,
Yes on that.
Commissioner Greavy,
Yes.
Commissioner Warblin,
No.
Commissioner Matthews,
Yes.
Chairperson Childs,
Yes.
and Commissioner Evans and Cruzen are absent. The motion passes. And that is the end of our meeting. I will mention our resolution currently does not have that condition as modified, so staff will revise the resolution and bring it back to you to your next scheduled planning commission.
Okay. And now we'll move on to the director's report.
All right, for the director's report, I am not your typical director. Our current director, or our normal director, if you will, David Gasaway, has been in an interim city manager position for some time, which has left a space in our community development director position. So Dave Feinstein has been brought up to the interim community development director, and myself, I have been brought up to the interim planning division manager. So thank you all for your patience with me this evening and kind of joining me for my first duty as secretary to the planning commission. Appreciate it.
Congratulations.
Thank you, and that is all I have.
And the only thing I had to share was that I did meet with the Rockville, that park advisory committee. So we had a meeting last week. So we're setting up our schedule for next year. We'll meet 4 times during the year. And so I have agreed that whenever there's something that impacts that park community that comes out of our meeting, I would report back to them. And that's it.
I just have 2 quick items. First of all, for commissioners that aren't aware, there's Cal Cities, which has training for planning commissioners every year. They also have a monthly call-in roundtable with planning commissioners from throughout the state.
Wow.
And there was one this morning. I find it interesting. There's always a update on legislative activities and some other comments. So I would encourage my fellow commissioners to check that out. The second thing I wanted to ask referral for future staff consideration is Ms. Martinez, who spoke in the public comment. While I don't subscribe to all of the items she brought up, one point that I do agree with is that besides the Solano, what's the word? The shelter, thank you, Solano Shelter. I have heard from various people in the community, and I think it's a point that bears some additional consideration to create a safe place for camping, where there might be portable facilities, it might be fenced and secured, and an alternative to the traditional shelter. And I would just ask that staff considers that for some future agenda and future discussion as to the relative merits of that.
Yes, I've made a note of it. I can coordinate with our Homeless Services Division and come back at your next meeting with some information.
Anyone else?
This is Commissioner Warblin. I do have a quick comment. A few meetings back, there was a public comment regarding the wall and the BMW in Fairfield, and I believe we were going to get a report back. There was some community members that disagreed with how the wall was being constructed, and I would be curious, not an urgent matter, but I think it would be important for follow-up on that information.
Yes, I can provide follow-up on that. Recapping the topic, the new BMW dealership is under construction. There are adjacent residences to the rear of the property. There were original conditions of approval for a 8-foot masonry wall to be constructed, dividing the residences from the BMW property. During building division plan check, field revisions were made in which the 6-foot existing masonry wall is to remain, and an additional 2-foot sound panel is to be constructed to achieve the 8-foot height that is necessary for the noise mitigation required by the conditions of approval. So to the citizens' point, that 8-foot wall is not under construction. What is under construction is the additional 2-foot sound panel, and that is consistent with the approved field revisions for the building permit. And that total of 8 feet will achieve the intended noise mitigation. At this moment, the construction is not complete, so any concerns the citizens may have in terms of the wall not being in proper order is a little premature. We need to allow construction to continue, and we have communicated that to the citizen. Upon initial or additional inspections as the project moves along further, staff will ensure that the existing 6-foot wall is in a good sound condition, and if it is not, we will be directing the general contractor to make repairs as necessary, because a total of 8-foot solid wall is necessary. Just at this time, there's still a lot of construction going on, and so any inspections conducted now would not be beneficial. We need to wait until the construction proceeds a little further.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are adjourned to our October 26, 2022 meeting.
Thank you.